Okay, it's time for another ETF comparison video today. And for today's contenders, we have number one, Amundi Index MSCI World Fund, and number two, ISAC ETF. So why I want to compare these two ETFs today is because firstly, both of them track the global markets and they are used by Singaporean investors for global exposure. Secondly, they can both be bought by SRS, your Supplementary Retirement Scheme. So for those of you who use SRS as a form of tax relief and you're thinking what to invest in, maybe this video is for you. And the similarity between these two ETFs is that both of them have exposure to global markets. So that's the main idea, but they track a very different index and have different fee structures. And yeah, let's walk through all of these details in today's video. And if you are new here, my name is Chris and I run a 22,000 members Telegram channel, so you can ask your investment questions or early retirement or CPF, SRS, all this in the Telegram group for free. Join us here. First up, let's talk about the Amundi Index MSCI World Fund, about what it tracks and what are the details. Okay, so this Amundi Index MSCI World Fund is fundamentally a unit trust. It is not an ETF. It is a unit trust that tracks the MSCI World Index. So if we take a look at this index, it is about 1,321 large and mid-cap stocks across developed countries only. And if we talk about all these countries, the US weight is roughly 70%. There is no emerging markets exposure and the expense ratio is 0.10%. And also some of you may have this confusion on what is the withholding tax. So this is a unit trust that is domiciled in Luxembourg. Hence the withholding tax is still 30%, not 15%, which is confused by some of you. So for this unit trust, you can purchase it on Poems. And why I really recommend Poems is because it doesn't need any sales charge or platform fees. So you are fundamentally investing for free and you can either use cash, CPF or SRS to invest in this unit trust, Amundi Index World MSCI Fund. Now let's take a look at the other contender, which is the ISDC ISAC ETF that is domiciled in Ireland. So it fundamentally tracks the MSCI All Country World Index or ACWI. Now, what is different about this ETF compared to Amundi Index World MSCI is that it includes both developed and emerging markets, and it tracks around 1,700 holdings with a broader diversification than MSCI World. So the key distinction between the Amundi fund versus ISAC ETF is that Amundi, they only track developed markets, so they exclude all the emerging markets. Whereas for ISAC, it includes both developed and emerging markets. So you must look at the exposure. For ISAC, the expense ratio is 0.20% with a dividend withholding tax of 15% since this is a UCITS funds domiciled in Ireland. And to buy ISAC via SRS, you can actually buy it on StashAway, which is a previous video that I did. There's this new product called StashAway ETF Explorer, and with just $1 sales charge, you can buy it at zero platform fees. So it is good for buy and hold. You just pay a one-time commission sales charge, and then you can hold it as long as you want on the StashAway ETF Explorer using SRS as well. So having discussed about the fundamentals, let's talk about fees and ongoing costs. Okay, which one is actually cheaper to maintain or hold in your portfolio? Starting with Amundi Index MSCI World Fund. Okay, and you can buy this fund if you want to do a similar apples to apples comparison using SRS. Then this will be a fair comparison because remember, Amundi Index MSCI World Fund can be bought with cash, CPF or SRS. So remember the expense ratio of this fund is 0.10%, which is considered fairly low. There is no brokerage fees for unit trust transactions if you purchase them through Poems, which is my preferred platform for CPF and SRS investing. And you don't even have to set aside excess cash or funds to pay the expense ratio because all this is automatically reflected in the net asset value of the unit trust. Okay, so it's a simple buy and hold cost structure. You just buy one time or you do dollar cost average through your regular savings plan and you don't really have to meddle with it, right? It's just like a 1-2 step process thing. What about the ISAC ETF if we buy through StashAway ETF Explorer? So for ISAC, you can either buy it with cash or SRS, but not CPF. Okay, it is not proof for CPF investing because this is a foreign domicile ETF. Expense ratio of 0.2% is actually double that of Amundi Index MSCI World Fund. So it's actually more expensive. And the fact is that there are transaction costs if you buy through Stashaway ETF Explorer, even using SRS. There's a $1 sales charge. And since it is an ETF, there's usually a bid-ask spread, right? The bidding price and asking price, and usually we buy at the market price. But for unit trust, there's only one price at the end of the day. So if you look at it from a surface level, Amundi Index MSCI World Fund is actually cheaper, right? In fact, cheaper by half, 0.1 versus 0.2. But you look at it, ISAC actually offers a broader exposure and ETF structure, right? Because it covers both developed and emerging markets. But there's some details that we still need to dive in, and that is the dividends withholding tax. And if we look at Amundi Index World MSCI Fund, I mentioned that it is domiciled in Luxembourg and it is a unit trust. Hence, they do not enjoy the same kind of UCITS ETF treaty. The dividend withholding tax will be at 30% instead of what people may misinterpret and say it's 15%. No. Okay, if you buy Amundi Index World MSCI Fund, it is at 30% dividend withholding tax. But don't get me wrong, you do not actually get like dividend distributions. All the dividends that are distributed will be reinvested back because it is an accumulating fund. That means that all these dividends will never touch your account. But if we were to calculate the impact of dividend withholding tax using the dividend yield of 1.58%, the tax drag will be 30% multiplied by 1.58%, and that is 0.47%. This is the tax drag. Now let's do the similar calculation for ISAC ETF, which is the Ireland domiciled UCITS ETF. So the underlying dividends for this one is subjected to a 15% dividends withholding tax since it's a UCITS ETF. And if we look at it, these dividends are also accumulating, which means they will not be paid out to you. It will just be reinvested back to the ETF. But if we use the dividend yield of around 1.53% for this ETF, the tax drag using 15% will only be 0.23%, which is almost half that of the Amundi Index MSCI World Fund, which is reasonable, right? Because 30% versus 15%, that is half of it. So I know some of you are already calculating which one is better already, but wait, okay, we leave it to the end of the calculation, then we do an overall summary. Now we want to talk about the platform experience because both Poems and Stashaway ETF Explorer are available for SRS funding, which means you contribute to SRS already. You want to think of how to invest, right? Which one is better? So for Poems, it is very straightforward for SRS investing. All you need to do is to link up your SRS bank account number, input it into your Poems profile, and once you place the order before 3 p.m., it will be filled on the same day net asset value. It will then draw the funds from your SRS account directly. There's no need to do any form of transfer to Poems account if you are investing through SRS. And the beauty about unit trust is that you will always get the same price as the others on the same day because there's only one end of day net asset value price. Okay, you will not get like a bid-ask spread, like you go for the day high or the day low. No, there's only one price. So it's very simplistic for unit trust. But remember that Poems is a traditional broker for over 50 years, so they have a long history. So it may not look very fancy in terms of the mobile app or the desktop platform or online portal. Yeah, so you have to give and take lah. Okay, they save more on these online user interfaces, but they provide you a cheap cost of no sales charge and platform fees, at least for the Amundi funds. Then for Stashaway, it is a newer digital platform. We used to call it robo-advisor, but it's actually more like a digital platform for you to invest your funds. And recently, with ETF Explorer, they allow SRS for investing. And you can see all this fancy information on the Stashaway ETF Explorer, depending on what you want to invest. But if you really know what you want to invest, then I guess it's also good to look at other options as well, other than global equities. So if you ask me, generally the older crowd of around 40s above, they may prefer Poems because they are familiar with this platform and their reputation. And then for the newer crowd in their 30s or 20s, they may more be suited for Stashaway because they like the user interface. So all these are very subjective to personal preference one. Okay, we take a look at tracking and performance reality because different indices means different returns over time. If you look at it, ISAC, they had the emerging markets exposure, which may not have done well in the past, but recently, these 2 years, emerging markets have been very strong. So that's the fundamental difference between the Amundi Index MSCI World Fund and ISAC, right? So emerging markets exposure could hurt you or help you, right? Depending on how is the market trending in the current macro economy. Okay, so we come to this exciting part. I'll give an overall summary of who should choose Amundi versus who should choose ISAC, but please don't take it as financial advice. I'm just doing a comparison between these two only. Objectively, you should choose Amundi if you prefer to invest in the MSCI World Fund, which means you don't want any emerging markets exposure, you just want developed markets, and you want the lowest expense ratio of 0.10%, and you just like unit trust simplicity, one price per day only. You don't need to look at beta spread. Okay, then you should go with Poem's platform to invest in the Amundi Index MSCI World Fund because that's the lowest cost available already. Now, for those of you who choose ISAC, it's because you don't mind or you even prefer the emerging markets exposure and you like this ETF structure. Even though it's paying like 0.20%, but it is also on a newer and upcoming platform StashAway. But let's take a look at the overall total fees, right? If we add in all the tax drag plus the withholding tax, it is actually 0.43% in ISAC ETF versus in Amundi, it is 0.57%. And that is if you sum up the expense ratio plus the dividend withholding tax drag. Okay, so fundamentally or objectively, if you look at cost, ISAC is actually more cost effective. But of course, as I always say, cost is just one aspect. Even though cost is guaranteed, profit is not guaranteed, but the overall returns is what really matters. Does adding emerging markets really strengthen the portfolio or does it cripple the portfolio? Nobody will know until the end of the year. So I want to correct some misunderstandings that you may see on the internet is that SRS can only invest in unit trust and not ETF. Firstly, that is of course untrue ever since StashAway ETF Explorer has come in. And not only you can invest in ISAC, ISAC ETF, you can also invest in other things like QQQ, the Nasdaq 100 index, which is also available on StashAway ETF Explorer for now. Okay, in the past, you can never get exposure to such US or international markets using SRS unless you go for unit trust. And also the very important distinction is that MSCI World Fund is not equals to MSCI All Country World Index. MSCI World is only developed. MSCI All Country World Index is developed plus emerging. That's why these two ETFs are actually tracking very different things. Also, if you are investing for the long term, all these fees and index choice matter more than the platform branding because Poems is a long-term standing traditional broker of over 50 years experience, so it may suit some people. But StashAway is also up and coming with their very new user-friendly UI features that can attract the younger crowd. So I would say that the fundamental product of what you want to invest in is more important than the platform itself. The platform maybe you only see once a month when you do your DCA or you do a one lump sum investment. So it's not that important. Okay. Most importantly, you must know what you want to invest and why you want to invest in it. Okay, so to sum up everything, if you forget what I just said in this video, number one, both of these two funds, Amundi MSCI Index World Fund and the StashAway ETF Explorer ISAC ETF, they are both SRS compatible. That means if you already contribute to your SRS, you can choose either of these funds to invest if you want a global exposure. Okay, for the first one, Amundi Index MSCI World Fund, it only has developed markets exposure with a 0.10% fee, simpler structure, and 30% dividends withholding tax, and it tracks the MSCI World Index. Then for ISAC ETF, it tracks the MSCI All Country World Index. So it has emerging markets exposure with 0.20% fee per year with a broader exposure and 15% dividends withholding tax, which is half of that of the Amundi fund. So there's no best choice because everyone has different opinions and preferences. It really depends on your index preference. Secondly, the fees, and number three, the behavior. Okay, are you going to stay in it for the long term? Not like this year, you only prefer developed markets. Next year, you prefer emerging markets. Don't flip-flop, okay? Just keep to one. Or if you're okay to have a diversification, it's good to have both 50%, 50%. So if you want to start investing with your SRS, note that this video is not sponsored. And if you want to support my channel for producing such investment comparison analysis content, then check out my links in description to sign up for Poems or StashAway, okay, to get started on your SRS investment journey. So I'm also curious to know, after hearing my comparison analysis, what would you choose? Would you choose the Amundi or the ISAC, right? So for those of you who choose Amundi, go and comment Amundi +1. For those of you who choose ISAC, go and comment ISAC +1, okay? And you can look at my previous video where I highlighted some of the best investments for SRS that you can look at. You can refer to this video right here.